Hi everyone, my name is Dominic Quagliozzi. I'm a visual artist from Massachusetts, and today we're going to be making anatomy drawings. And what I mean by that is we're going to deconstruct the process of drawing, and we're going to show the viewer those steps in the final work. So this is something that I do in my regular practice. As a visual artist, I make paintings and drawings and do performance art that has to do with chronic illness and disability, deals with themes of ableism and how chronic illness has impacted my life. So I want to share that with you, and I can't wait to get started. So for supplies, we need 2 pieces of paper, colored pencils, tape. You can also use hot glue if you want, scissors, water cups, brushes, and watercolors. So I'll show you an example of what I mean by anatomy drawings. I have one behind me that I'll show you. This one's kind of big. We're not going to be doing one this size, but this is a recent artwork I've made. It's going to a show in Philadelphia. So this is all cut paper, colored pencil, and different types of inks. This particular ink that I use this time for this drawing is, hold on, let me turn this light down a little bit so you can see that. The ink that I use for this particular drawing is actually betadine, which is an antiseptic solution that you clean your skin with before surgeries or after first aid injuries. And then you can kind of see the colored pencil in here. And so this process is very intuitive for me. We're going to start with blank paper, a few sheets. We're going to make drawings with colored pencil and watercolor sets. So the watercolor is kind of like what the ink I'm using, and the colored pencil are for more sharper lines. Oh, before we get started, I wanted to mention the reason why I'm calling these anatomy drawings is for 2 reasons. One, these are kind of like taking from old anatomy books where you see the descriptions of the human body, and then next to it is a drawn diagram from illustrators and other artists. And those are usually this sepia brown color or black ink, and then maybe 1 or 2 other colors, because when they were first being published, the ink was expensive or they didn't have a lot of variety of colors. So the palette is limited. So that's what I've kind of done here, is kind of abstracted that process of making these anatomy drawings and kind of shaped it into this, what ends up being the process of collaging in a way. And this one you can see on the back, this one's actually sewn together. You can kind of see some of the stitches here. A little bit difficult to catch, but you can kind of see it's the stitching. So for our drawing, we're going to be using tape, or if you have hot glue, you can use hot glue or regular glue. If you have a sewing machine, you can also use a sewing machine. So I use a lot of sewing in my practice. So I did sewing on that one, but then at the end, I glued some of the areas together as well. So there aren't really any rules other than just kind of sit with yourself, feel how you're feeling. I like to kind of clear my mind a little bit. When I'm making the drawing, I don't really have any preconceived notions of what it's going to turn out to be. This process for me is a little bit meditative. It's a little bit exploring my own experience with my own body. It's kind of letting whatever happens, happens. And so I want to make sure that I don't get overly fussy about the finished product. I let the mistakes stay in the work. So if I make a mistake with the drawing, I could either erase it or I make the same shape that I wanted to right next to the mistake. And that kind of all adds to the feel. And when I mentioned the anatomy drawing, yes, it's taking reference from these old classical anatomy books, but also it's actually revealing the process of making itself through the drawing. So it's kind of like, in my opinion, showing the anatomy of what it takes to make a drawing. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to get the supplies. There'll be a couple of different camera angles, one where we're talking face to face, and then another where we're looking down at my paper so you can kind of see what I'm doing. And I'll be kind of talking through some of the steps and what I'm thinking and feeling while we're doing that. And then we're also going to use some scissors later in the process to completely cut up the drawings, which you think, oh, I just made this great drawing and now we're going to cut it up. That seems very scary or frightening, counterproductive, but really it's like an act of freeing yourself from all these different notions of what the drawing should be and how good it can be, and just kind of letting go of everything and letting the process of making the drawing end up influencing how the drawing ends up looking, the final product. So first I'm going to pick my colored pencils. So I'm going to do like this peachy color. I'm going to do a hot pink, a light blue, a red, and I'll do a dark blue. So this is a limited palette. See, I only have 5 colored pencils. And then I'm going to start to think about how my body feels. Let's draw that cough, right? So we're just making any kind of marks we want. There's no judgment on anything we're doing. That's how that cough felt, like this. So with the colored pencils, I'm thinking about line drawing. I'm thinking about how heavy I'm making the mark, right? If I'm going to color or scribble, like I made it so heavy there, the colored pencil itself kind of started to shatter. And then, yeah, so I'm going to just kind of make all different designs and colors and shapes and whatever I kind of feel in the moment. I'm thinking more about being intuitive. So in actuality, not thinking really at all, just reacting to the texture of the paper, the sound of the colored pencil on the paper. Maybe I'll draw like veins or something. So shapes and maybe things that you find inside the body, right? There's some veins, and then I have some other veins coming this way. I'll take some dark blue, make some, maybe these are like intestines or something. So I'm making kind of general intuitive marks that react and respond to what's going down on the paper. I'm also kind of thinking about body related shapes or colors, right? Things that might look kind of like organs or muscles. You can do muscle striations with like this hot pink, right? Because at the end of this process, we're going to be cutting the paper in all different shapes. And so we're not necessarily going to know where those cut shapes are going to end up getting put back together. So that's like a very fun process of discovery. So I want you to be more loose with the drawings. So this is one page. I have the other page that I'm going to make a drawing. I'll do this on my own time. You can pause the video now if you want to make your drawings, and then we'll come back and we'll put in the watercolors. Okay, so now as you can see here, this is the second drawing that I finished. I added some of these like thick strokes of color. I kind of just went in there and I pressed down really hard. Even harder, really hard, so you can actually see the wood part of the colored pencil actually scrape the paper. So I'm playing with different pressures and textures, and all these kind of things add to how the end result feels. Because these drawings they're about visuals that you see here, but also about the physicality and the feeling of things. That's kind of like the main theme of the anatomy drawing that I've been creating for a little while here, is like capturing the physicality, the texture, the weightiness of the color and paper and marks, and you see some scratches into the paper and things like that. So now we're going to contrast some of that roughness with colored water, basically watercolors. That's kind of more soft and gentle. So I'm going to go through, I have, a pretty large selection of colors in my palette, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to mimic the limited palette of the colored pencil and just choose a few colors. And I'm going to choose more natural colors. These ones are kind of bright and vibrant, the blue and the red and the hot pink. I'm going to choose more natural colors that are tend towards neutrals. So I'm going to choose this like brownish color. And I don't want to color the whole paper. I want to leave some white, and I just think that adds different dimensions of depth. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to bring in some of this brown here. And I'm just kind of making shapes and coloring over some of the colored pencil. Let's try to get this a little darker. When you use watercolor, the more water you use, the lighter, more washy the color comes out. If you use a little bit of water and a lot of the pigment, then it's going to end up looking darker. See the difference? So that's kind of what I want right now. I'm looking for contrasts. I'm looking for really interesting transparencies and overlapping like the colored pencil with the watermarks. Now I want to do just kind of a light wash up here. If you put down color like that and then you take some fresh water, you can kind of have it bleed a little bit. That looks pretty interesting. So again, the main point for this step of the drawings is adding some really interesting transparencies and contrasting some of the roughness of the colored pencil. And we're going to fill up this page. We're going to fill up this page with I'm going to just use two colors. I'm going to use like this kind of dark violet blue and that brown. So there's that blue. I want to get it a little darker. I'm going to go right to the edge there, but I'm also going to be leaving white spaces. And I'm just thinking about different color, different types of passages through these different colors. I'm not sure if the camera's picking it up that well, but this kind of peachy orange with this blue is looking really neat. The colored pencil is basically wax and pigment. So when you put the water over that, it doesn't necessarily stick that well over the colored pencil. So they kind of compete for what's showing through the watercolor. So I'm going to add just a few more on this paper. Let's go back to brown real quick. Kind of blend these two like that. There. So that's for one. And then the first drawing that you saw me do is this one. This one is a little more line based. So again, I'm going to go through with some of the browns. I'm going to kind of come in, make some negative space. I'm going to color that in. So once you get to a point where you're happy with how the drawings look, and you think you've covered enough of the paper, we're going to let that sit and dry. You can put it in front of a fan or like a space heater if you have one, or you can just let it dry for, you know, watercolor usually dries in about an hour or less, depending on the color and the thickness of your paper. Thicker paper absorbs the water faster, so it'll dry a little quicker. So let's see, I'm gonna do one more mark. I'm gonna go whoop, right down the middle there. Okay, so there's my 2 watercolor sessions. You can kind of see these. This is how the papers are gonna look. These are 2 drawings. And then, so normally you might think, okay, like I have 2 really nice drawings. I really like what they're doing. And that's great. I like to get them to a point where I actually really like the drawings standalone as they are. And then when we come back, we're going to cut them up and really let loose. Maybe we can even rip them. And we're not going to really fuss about cutting out too many shapes or anything. We're just going to kind of intuitively break these apart. Okay, so here are my 2 drawings. I'm going to take my scissors. So we'll think about it. Our end result will be like maybe an arm with a hand, or you can use your foot, or you can use maybe like your chest or your head or any kind of body part, or you can do something entirely different. It's up to you. You could do a butterfly with the 4 wings. For this video, I'm going to use my hand like this, perhaps. So I'm going to just start cutting shapes out of these 2 drawings, and then we're going to kind of piece them together like a puzzle. So I'm looking at what's interesting on the page. Like this area is interesting, this area is interesting, so I'm going to keep those relatively intact. So I'm going to just kind of make a cut like that. So this is now a piece that'll be used for the final assembled drawing. I think that looks cool. Let's go like that. There's a really interesting sensation of just kind of letting go and letting the drawing kind of work itself out. And one of the things too, you don't need to use every piece. And if you want to reshape a piece, you can certainly cut in. And then like this can get discarded. You don't need to use every single piece of the paper once you've cut it up. So I'm starting to collect my shapes here. And as I cut my shapes, I'm gonna start to think about how they might fit together. So at this point, I might need this later for like maybe a gestural mark. So I'm gonna put this aside for a minute, and I'm gonna come to this drawing, and I'll start cutting out pieces of this drawing. And I think, you know, there's no right or wrong, but I think interesting curves, that'll make something really cool. And this is why I was mentioning leaving some white paper showing, because it ends up creating an interesting amount of depth, so the drawing doesn't really feel flat. So here's the shape I'm going to make. I'm going to start to just kind of figure out where these might go. So that might be cool, right? So then I'm just going to start to think about where they might fit together. Do I want these two shapes next to each other? Maybe. So that's starting to kind of look interesting. So then I'm going to take my tape, or if you have hot glue, you can do that. And I'm going to start just taping the back so they stay together. See, just like that. That one piece of tape held 1, 2, 3 pieces together. So that's just kind of starting. That's going to be like about where the hand is, but I'm not trying to be completely accurate. I know I'm calling these anatomy drawings, so you'd think anatomy is pretty specific and accurate, but we're artists here, so we're not going to be too fussy about the accuracy. We're using a little bit of abstraction and a little bit of gesture. When I make these drawings for my own studio practice, sometimes I'll end up having, almost full sheets of paper left over that didn't end up making it into the final drawing. And what I do is I put those aside, and then once I have collected a whole bunch of those, I make a whole new, completely different anatomy drawing from those. So I want to start to think about the forearm area here. This I'm not sure. Maybe that's actually, that might end up being maybe a finger or a thumb or something. I like this right here. This is very interesting to me. It's got a lot going on. It has the brown and the pink. So this is really cool right here. I'm gonna make this. I'm gonna put that there. I like how this brown kind of flows into this hot pink and blue situation here. So once I have an idea of what I like, I'm just gonna go ahead and tape that together on the back. I'm gonna leave a little piece of tape hanging over so I can put something else there. So actually I like underneath better, so I'm gonna alter this. I'm in the moment, and I'm just gonna cut that off. I think that looks pretty cool. And that is really interesting because this cut, I didn't do this on purpose, but this cut matches perfectly where this pink and this blue brush stroke. So I like those little interesting moments that happen. So now we'll kind of, we'll put these together. This is looking cool. And if you want to make all your cuts and arrange everything first, you can do that. I'm going through and I'm taping as I go because I've been doing this for a little while and I have experience. But if you want to, I'm going to turn that hand a little. If you want to lay it all out first, you can do that. I'm being a little bit more spontaneous. So what you're seeing is you're seeing some of the texture, the pressure where I was drawing, and then some of the watercolor, the washiness, and it's kind of all layering up to be different textures and shapes and depths. So I'm going to pause the video here to work on this a little bit, and you can pause it here too if you want to work, and then we'll come back and the hand arm shape will be closer to being finished, and then we'll finish it together. Okay, so I'm getting close to being finished. So I have a piece of tape here showing through. So what I did was I took this was almost going to be a scrap, but I really like some of the color combos in there. So I'm going to pull this little piece up, and I'm going to slide this between the two and see how I can connect it there, but it makes like some beautiful lines connected there. So then I stick it down on that tape that was there. And then I cut out some fingers and a thumb. So I'm going to attach those on the back. So I just kind of stick tape on like this. This is the middle finger. Actually, I'm using this blue painter's tape because you can kind of pull it off and move it around if you have to. So there's one. And again, obviously, these aren't anatomically correct, even though they're technically called anatomy drawings. But that's just a name that I made up for them. This is what the back looks like. Pretty interesting, all this tape and stuff. The back could be its own piece, you know what I mean? If you want to use glue too, that is a little bit more sturdy probably. There you go. So that's the fingers. This is the thumb. And the thumb really fits in beautifully with these pinks and kind of dark lavender blues that I ended up coming up with. So that's going to be sticking off the side like that. And then I'll put a little extra tape to secure it. So this is the same process I use to make these big drawings that I end up sewing. I kind of free form, lay them out, and then I go in and out with the sewing machine. So here's the arm and hand, you can see. I left this. I have to do the index finger here, and then I wanted to just continue the forearm here. So remember when I said you can kind of leave large sheets just in case you need it? So even though a lot of these were kind of intuitive cutting without really thinking too much, this I'm going to actually make a specific cut because I really think that this would be really beautiful right on that end of the arm to create this shape here. So I'm just going to cut that out almost exactly the way it is. And then I can kind of start to put it in there, see? I want to move it down a little bit. So I think it's maybe too round, so I'm going to cut it a little bit straighter. And so we're kind of adjusting and going as we... Yeah, that looks really good right there. So I'm going to kind of just mark it off with my hand. That's whereabouts, and then I'll save the rest. So let's go ahead and put that on. And we're getting close to being finished here. There. Really interesting combinations in here. So that's on there. Now I'm going to flip it over and just secure it with some more tape. And every time you add tape and every time you add a new layer of paper, it strengthens it. So here's a lot of tape. I mean, here's a lot of paper here. I'm going to put a bigger piece of tape on there to really secure it. One more here. Okay. I want to be able to pick it up and move it around without it falling apart. So that's kind of the goal of that. So that's what it's looking like, and we just need the pointer finger here. And then you can make alterations as you see fit. No, I like that here, but this, well, I'll put the pointer finger here. This extends past, and it doesn't really make a nice line, which is okay, but should we use this blue piece for the index finger? I think that would look really cool. And then this blue kind of ends up running through the whole hand. It's like your life force or your your the air or your blood or something really energizing in your body. So there, let's actually just kind of make that more of a finger. Okay. So let's get that going. This came out really fun. So there's a really nice brown here, but it's gonna get covered up, unfortunately. That's all right. There. I'm gonna flip that over and secure that. So this has to be overlapping because that finger is really delicate. So I'm gonna do that. And then I'm just gonna go through and cut that extra tape off. Okay, so here's my hand with the arm, the forearm, the wrist. Is there any other suggestions or changes you might make? It gets a little flat here because of all the white. So maybe I have a scrap that has some interesting color in here. This lavender is really cool. If you think about how the hand moves, at the wrist it breaks. And there's, depending on how the light goes, there could be a shadow there. So maybe this will be a good shadow to really kind of make it look like a hand. So I'm going to add that in. See, I'm not really overly, so that's going to go there. So I'm going to end up cutting this off a little bit. I'm not overly designing it too much. I'm just kind of seeing what the drawing itself needs. So as you layer the drawing with all these paper, I used, actually, I should mention, I used Bristol paper, which is a little bit thicker than a regular paper. It's 100 pound. You can also use watercolor paper. You can use regular paper, but it's a little bit flimsy. So I would use 100 pound or more watercolor or Bristol paper. This is almost like a cardstock in a way. So the thickness of the paper helps the drawing stay together. So this piece is kind of curling up. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a tape underneath. There we go. So look at all the scraps that I left that I didn't use. It's, you know, the bigger pieces you can save for other collage drawings. This one has some good stuff going on. This one has some really cool stuff going on. But for now, I'm going to move that aside. Here's the finished drawing. It looks really cool. And then the last step, I'm going to sign it. Anatomy drawing. Number 30. 2025 now. Wow. All right, this was such a blast. I had so much fun. I'm going to leave my email and my Instagram information, and if you make a hand or an arm or a foot or a head or whatever body part you make, or a butterfly or whatever shape you make, and you want me to see it, you can email it to me or send it to me on Instagram. Thanks so much. That was awesome. I had so much fun. It's really cool because you get to see how the drawing was made. You can see the layers. See the layers building up. You can see the marks in the paper. You can see the watercolor. You can see some of the cut marks where it's not completely flushed together. And that's why I really love these drawings, because you have a finished piece, a visual, but it's also a thing. It's also a structure that you can see how it was built up. And again, that's why I was calling them anatomy drawings, because you can actually see the anatomy of how it was made. So a lot of intuitive process here. We're not getting overly fussy. It's a way to kind of make art, meditate, let go. Some things you can control, the marks you make and the cuts you make and where you piece them back together, but some things you can't control, like how some of the pieces fit. Once you make a cut, you have to figure out how to maneuver it into the actual drawing. So there you go.